The stars had never seemed so silent. For millennia, humanity had gazed at the night sky, wondering if we were truly alone, or if there were other civilizations out there, watching, waiting. No one could have predicted that when they came, they would see us as nothing more than ants, insignificant, primitive, and weak. The alien warriors, a fearsome race known as the Arathians, arrived with overwhelming force. Their ships blotted out the sky, and their technology was far beyond anything humanity had ever dreamed of. They had traveled across the stars, crushing worlds beneath their boots, and when they finally set their sights on Earth, they expected an easy conquest. Their leader, Zarnok, surveyed the planet from his command ship, the size of a small moon. "This world is fragile," he said, his voice booming through the ship's war room. "The humans are weak, their armies no match for us. They will surrender without a fight." His advisors agreed. Earth, with its divided nations and primitive technology, seemed like the perfect target. The Arathians had conquered countless planets with ease, and they had no reason to believe Earth would be any different. In their eyes, we were nothing more than a stepping stone, a soft, defenseless target on their path to galactic domination. But the arrogance of the Arathians would prove to be their greatest mistake. It was on the third day of their invasion that they made their first true mistake. The streets of New York City had been deserted, the once bustling metropolis reduced to a ghost town as the Arathians made their landing. No one dared challenge them, no one except one man. John Kane was no soldier. He wasn't a general, a hero, or even an ordinary man with any special skills. He was a mechanic, a man who fixed broken engines and built small machines. But when the Arathians attacked, John didn't run. He didn't cower. He didn't even hesitate. As an Arathian warship hovered over the city, firing lasers into the streets, John stood in the rubble of what was once a thriving neighborhood. In his hands, he gripped a tool, a simple wrench, nothing more. He knew it wasn't going to be enough to defeat the invaders, but he also knew that if no one stood up, Earth would fall without a fight. With a roar of defiance, John ran toward the alien forces. His actions were reckless, almost suicidal, but something deep inside him stirred, a fierce, unyielding desire to protect his home, to show the invaders that humanity wasn't as soft as they thought. The Arathians watched in disbelief as the man charged. To them, this human was a mere insect, nothing more than a nuisance. Zarnok himself looked on, amused by the sight. "Is this the best they can muster?" he sneered. "A single human, armed with nothing but a wrench?" But John wasn't just charging mindlessly. As he sprinted toward the first of the alien soldiers, he spotted a weakness, one of their energy shields flickering. It was a flaw, an oversight in their otherwise perfect technology. The human mind, so far behind the Arathian intellect, was capable of seeing things that they couldn't. Simple, small things that made all the difference. Without thinking, John hurled his wrench at the shield. It struck the point where the shield was weakest, causing a ripple of energy that knocked the alien soldier off balance. The shockwave of the impact sent a tremor through the surrounding forces, throwing them into confusion. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The alien warriors, accustomed to crushing any opposition, stood in stunned silence. John Kane, panting and exhausted, stood in the middle of the chaos, his chest heaving, his eyes wide with disbelief. He had done it. He had struck a blow. Zarnok, finally realizing the threat that this human posed, narrowed his eyes. "This is no mere inconvenience," he muttered. "This human, he has defied us." His voice dripped with anger and contempt. "We will not let this insult stand." But John wasn't done yet. He had ignited something within him, a fire that burned hotter with each passing second. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for his people, for the world that had been overlooked and underestimated. He wasn't going to let the Arathians turn Earth into another conquest. The battle was far from over. The Arathians had underestimated humanity, and John Kane was about to show them exactly what it meant to be human. As John stood amidst the chaos, the Arathian soldiers regrouped, their superior weapons quickly turning the tide. Their advanced technology allowed them to repair and counter every small glitch in their systems with terrifying efficiency. The ground rumbled beneath John's feet as the Arathians began to press forward, encircling him, their energy weapons crackling with deadly intent. For a moment, John thought it was over. The odds were stacked against him. He was just one man, and no matter how hard he fought, he couldn't take down an entire army. Yet something within him refused to surrender. His mind raced, looking for any advantage, any way to exploit their weaknesses. He was a mechanic, not a soldier, but this was his home, and he wasn't going to let it fall without a fight. As the first alien warrior lunged at him, John ducked instinctively, narrowly avoiding the swing of a glowing energy blade. The alien's momentum carried it forward, crashing into a nearby structure. The impact sent debris flying, and John's eyes flicked toward the wreckage. It was a sign. He darted toward the fallen building, weaving through the broken concrete and twisted metal. The Arathians hesitated, unsure of what he was doing, but John wasn't afraid. He reached the structure and quickly began to pry loose the pieces of metal, pulling apart a broken transmission device. Inside, he found what he needed: a small, portable power source. A grin tugged at the corners of his lips. The Arathians had underestimated him. They had assumed that their high-tech gadgets would intimidate him, but they hadn't accounted for one thing: humans could adapt. John had spent his life fixing broken machines, understanding how things worked. And now, he was going to use that knowledge to turn the tide of the battle. As the Arathians closed in, John threw the power source at the ground. It exploded in a burst of energy, sending a shockwave through the alien ranks. The soldiers staggered, momentarily blinded by the flash of light. It was enough of a distraction for John to leap into action, grabbing one of the alien rifles that had fallen to the ground. The weapon was unlike anything he had ever seen, its sleek black surface gleaming in the sun. But to John, it wasn't an alien weapon. It was just another machine. With a deep breath, he adjusted the settings, figuring out how to fire it. As the Arathians scrambled to regain their bearings, John opened fire. The first shot hit an Arathian soldier square in the chest, and the energy beam burned through the alien's armor like paper. The creature screeched, stumbling backward, its limbs twitching uncontrollably. It wasn't dead yet, but the message was clear. This human was not someone to be taken lightly. Zarnok watched from above, his fury growing with each passing moment. He had never expected this from a human. He had believed Earth's inhabitants were soft, weak creatures who would crumble before his superior force. But John Kane, with his stubborn defiance, was proving to be a formidable adversary. "Deploy the heavy artillery," Zarnok ordered, his voice low and filled with venom. "End this foolishness." The Arathians responded swiftly, unleashing their most powerful weapons. Massive war machines dropped from the skies, their huge frames towering over the city, bristling with guns and energy cannons. The ground shook as they landed, their metal feet crushing the pavement beneath them. Their weapons hummed with power, ready to annihilate anything in their path. But John wasn't intimidated. He knew this wasn't the end. It couldn't be. He had already made the first move. Now he needed to keep the momentum going. He darted through the ruins, taking cover behind crumbling walls and overturned cars. His heart pounded, but his mind was sharp, focused. He was fighting for more than his survival. He was fighting for Earth, for every person on the planet who couldn't fight for themselves. As the heavy artillery advanced, John spotted a second flaw. One of the massive war machines was limping, its movements jerky, as if something was off with its power core. Without a second thought, John sprinted toward it, weaving through the hail of alien fire. He was close now, so close he could see the exposed power core. It pulsed with a strange electric blue light. The core was the heart of the war machine, the key to its destructive force. If he could disable it, the rest of the machine would be useless. John's breath caught in his throat as he approached. The war machine's weapons fired, but he ducked behind a nearby building just in time. His mind raced with possibilities, trying to calculate the best way to disable the core. It was risky, but it was the only chance he had. With no time to lose, John leaped into action, diving beneath the war machine's massive legs. He crawled toward the exposed core, his fingers trembling as he reached for the device that controlled the machine's power. The Arathians were closing in fast, and if he failed, he would never get another chance. His hands shook as he attached a small explosive device to the core, setting the timer. He barely had time to get clear before the blast went off, sending a shockwave that rocked the entire street. The war machine shuddered, its limbs seizing up before it collapsed to the ground in a heap of twisted metal. John didn't have time to celebrate. The Arathians would be furious, and he needed to keep the pressure on. As the smoke from the destroyed war machine cleared, he turned to face the next wave of invaders, determined to show them that Earth was anything but soft. The Arathians were reeling, their plans thrown into chaos by the unexpected destruction of their war machine. Zarnok's eyes blazed with fury as he watched the carnage unfold from his command ship. The human, John Kane, had proven to be far more resourceful than he could have ever imagined. But it wouldn't last. Zarnok knew that with his army and technology, he would soon crush this insolent human and make an example of him. But the humans were not backing down. John's small victories were rallying the survivors, pushing them to fight back, to resist. He had given them something they had lost: hope. It was a dangerous thing for an invading force, especially when the people you are trying to subjugate begin to believe they can win. John didn't have time to savor his victory. The battle raged on around him, the noise of alien weaponry and explosions deafening. He ducked behind a burned-out vehicle, his heart racing as he reloaded the alien rifle. He was a long way from being ready to face their entire army, but he had become something that the Arathians hadn't planned for: a symbol. His defiance had sparked something deep inside the people of Earth. Ordinary men and women, soldiers and civilians alike, were beginning to rise, fighting back, inspired by his bravery. A small group of survivors emerged from the shadows, led by a woman named Maya Carter, a former military officer who had been separated from her unit during the initial invasion. She had been watching John's actions from afar, and she knew he was their best chance at survival. "We need to move now," Maya said, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. She was a seasoned fighter, used to battle, but even she couldn't ignore the scale of the destruction that was unfolding. "We can't just keep running and hiding. If we're going to win, we need to hit them hard, while they're still reeling." John nodded, his resolve strengthening. He wasn't a soldier, he was a mechanic, but in this moment his skills, his resourcefulness, were more important than any weapon. "We hit them where it hurts," he said, his voice low but determined. "We find their power sources, their communication lines. We sabotage everything we can." Maya smiled, impressed by his quick thinking. "Exactly. We have to take away their advantage, make them play on our terms." John's eyes narrowed as he looked out across the battlefield. The Arathians were regrouping, sending in reinforcements, but the small victory he had achieved, along with Maya's leadership, had given him a new sense of purpose. He had never considered himself a hero, but in that moment, With the future of Earth hanging in the balance, he realized that the line between hero and ordinary man wasn't as thick as he had once thought. "You ready to take the fight to them?" Maya asked, pulling him back to the present. John didn't hesitate. "Let's go." The group moved quickly, navigating the rubble and chaos, staying low to avoid detection. The Arathians were relentless, but John and Maya's crew had the advantage of knowing their home turf. They knew how to move through the city's maze of streets, tunnels, and hidden pathways. For all their superior technology, the Arathians had underestimated one thing: humanity's will to survive. As they approached a power station that had been repurposed by the invaders, John's mind raced with ideas. They needed to disable the Arathians' ability to launch full-scale attacks. The power station, with its high-energy capabilities, was the heart of their offensive operations in the city. If they could knock it out, it would severely disrupt their plans. "John, you and me will go in. The rest of you, cover the perimeter," Maya ordered. John nodded, adjusting the rifle slung over his shoulder. The power station loomed ahead, a massive structure pulsating with alien energy. It seemed impregnable, a fortress, but to John, it was just another machine, and all machines had weaknesses. He had spent his entire life fixing machines, taking them apart, understanding how they worked. The same ingenuity he had used to fix engines and gadgets would now serve to dismantle the Arathian war machine. They approached the station carefully, using the ruins as cover. As they neared the entrance, a pair of Arathian guards stood watch, their backs turned. Maya gestured to John, her hand signaling him to wait. She moved silently, her military training kicking in. With a swift motion, she incapacitated one guard, a precise strike to the neck, while John dealt with the other. It wasn't pretty, but it was effective. "Inside," Maya whispered, and they crept toward the entrance. The inside of the power station was a labyrinth of energy conduits, alien machinery, and pulsating lights. The hum of the power core filled the air. They had to move quickly before reinforcements arrived. Maya led the way, with John close behind. They reached the main control room, a large chamber filled with alien consoles, monitors, and a towering energy core at the center. John studied the control panel, his mind working fast. The Arathians had overestimated their ability to secure Earth. They had been so confident in their technology, they had forgotten the one thing that made humanity dangerous: our ability to adapt, to learn, and to survive against impossible odds. "I've got this," John said, turning to Maya. "Cover me." Maya nodded, taking up a defensive position. John set to work, quickly scanning the controls and trying to decipher the alien systems. They didn't make it easy, but John had always been good at understanding things that didn't make sense. Piece by piece, he dismantled the system, figuring out how to destabilize the energy core without causing a full explosion. The Arathians had relied on their technology to dominate, but they had underestimated the power of human ingenuity. With one last turn of a dial, the station's lights flickered, and the power core began to pulse erratically. "We've got company," Maya warned, her voice tight as she aimed her weapon at the door. John didn't look back. "Let them come." The sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the hallways of the power station, growing louder with each passing second. John's heart pounded in his chest, but he didn't falter. The core was destabilizing, but it wasn't going to blow just yet. They had a few precious minutes. Maybe less. He had to finish what he started. "Maya, we need to move fast," John said, his voice low but filled with urgency. His fingers danced across the alien controls, overriding security systems and activating a countdown sequence. The room hummed with power, and the light from the core flickered ominously. It was almost as if the machine was alive, aware that its end was near. The door to the control room crashed open, and a squad of Arathian soldiers stormed in, their weapons raised. Maya was already firing, each shot hitting its mark with deadly precision. But even as the first few soldiers fell, more poured in from the hallway, their numbers overwhelming. John grabbed a nearby metal pipe, using it to pry open the access panel on the control console. Sweat dripped down his face as he worked frantically. The Arathians were relentless, and they knew the importance of this station. If they lost control of the power core, the entire operation would fall apart. "John!" Maya shouted as another wave of aliens charged toward them. Her gun clicked empty, and she dove for cover behind a nearby column, narrowly avoiding a pulse shot. "Hurry up!" "I'm almost there," he called back, his hands shaking as he wired a series of makeshift explosives to the core's main reactor. It wasn't elegant, but it would get the job done. The station's energy would be completely neutralized, and the Arathians would be forced to retreat, at least for a while. The Arathians advanced, their weapons lighting up the darkened room in a series of blinding flashes. One of the alien soldiers aimed his plasma rifle at Maya, but before he could fire, John leapt forward, slamming into him with all the force he could muster. The alien stumbled back, surprised by the human's sudden assault. John was no soldier, but he had the fury of someone fighting for everything he loved. Maya took the opportunity to finish him off, a single shot taking the soldier down. But there were more coming, and John could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He needed to finish the task before they were overwhelmed. He took a deep breath and slammed the final control panel into place. A loud hum echoed through the room, followed by a deep, rumbling sound as the power core began to overload. John had done it. They had destabilized the core, and the countdown had started. "Get to the exit now!" John shouted, turning to Maya. She didn't hesitate. She sprinted toward the hallway, and John followed right behind, hearing the Arathians' war cries as they closed in. The station was coming down. The energy core was on the brink of collapse, and every second counted. They had made their stand here, but they weren't going to win by staying. John knew the blast would be massive. They had to get out, and they had to do it fast. They ran through the hallways, the sound of alien footsteps growing fainter as they outran their pursuers. But the station was shifting, groaning as the energy system destabilized. The walls cracked, and the ceiling began to crumble. John's mind raced as he tried to think of a way out, some escape route that wouldn't end in them being caught in the explosion. "There's a tunnel system under the station," Maya said between breaths. "We can use it to escape. This way." Without another word, she veered left, and John followed. The tunnel system was old, hidden beneath the power station for maintenance access. It wasn't pretty, but it was a way out. The ground shook beneath their feet as the station's core began its final countdown. The walls trembled, and debris rained down from the ceiling, forcing them to move faster. They reached a heavy door at the end of the corridor, and Maya punched in a code she remembered from her military days. The door slid open with a metallic groan, revealing a narrow, dimly lit tunnel that descended into the earth. John was about to step through when he heard a voice over his comlink. "John, this is Maya. Come in." John's pulse quickened. It wasn't her voice. There was something wrong with the transmission. "Who is this?" John growled into the comm, his grip tightening around the radio. "We've been expecting you," the voice on the other end said, low and mocking. It wasn't Maya. John froze, his instincts screaming that something wasn't right. "Maya," he called, but there was no response. His heart sank. Something had happened. She hadn't made it out in time. The voice on the comm clicked again, but this time it was accompanied by a sinister laugh. "You really thought you could defeat us, human? How amusing. The station is already under control again. You may have sabotaged the power core, but you've only delayed the inevitable." John's blood ran cold as the voice continued. "And your little victory? It won't matter. You're alone now. The invasion continues. And as for your precious Maya, well, let's just say she's no longer in your way." John's hands shook with fury. They had taken Maya. They had taken the one person who had stood beside him from the start. The one person who had believed in him when no one else did. The Arathians were smart. They had known to separate him from his allies. But they had underestimated him again. He wasn't done. John's breath came in heavy gasps as the world around him seemed to slow, the weight of the situation settling into his bones. Maya was gone, or at least that's what the Arathian voice on the comm had claimed. He didn't believe it, not for a second. They couldn't have taken her without leaving some trace. Maya was a survivor, a fighter. She wasn't someone who would be taken so easily. The voice on the comm continued, its mocking tone still echoing in his ears. "We will find you, human. You cannot hide forever. The Arathian Empire is vast, and your resistance, it's nothing but a fleeting moment in time." John's fingers trembled as he clenched the comm device tighter, his mind racing. There had to be a way to turn this around. He had already taken down one of their power stations. The core was destabilized, and they had lost ground, at least temporarily. But now the stakes were higher. The Arathians had taken Maya, and they were gloating about it. For the first time since this war had started, John felt the crushing weight of desperation. He had been fighting for survival, for his people, for his world. But now it was personal. He had been alone before, but never like this. He had made a promise to Maya that they would win this fight together. And now he had to honor that promise. No more running. John disconnected the comm, the static fading as his resolve hardened. He was done being reactive. The Arathians had underestimated humanity, but they had also underestimated the fury of a man with nothing left to lose. He wouldn't just wait for them to find him. He would go to them. He would take the fight straight to their heart. The tunnel was narrow, dark, and cold. It was an escape route, but it wasn't a safe haven. John's boots echoed off the stone walls as he made his way deeper, moving as quickly and quietly as he could. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth, and the further he went, the more isolated he felt from everything he knew. But the tunnel led somewhere. Somewhere he could regroup, find a way to strike back. Minutes felt like hours as John navigated through the underground maze, his mind replaying everything that had happened. Maya's face, her unwavering confidence, her trust in him. He couldn't let her down. Not now. He needed to find her. The tunnel opened up into a large cavern, the walls lined with glowing crystals that emitted a faint, otherworldly light. The space was eerily quiet, save for the sound of water dripping somewhere in the distance. John paused, taking in his surroundings. The cavern stretched out before him, vast and intimidating. But there was a flicker of movement in the distance, a faint glimmer of something or someone standing still. He moved cautiously, his rifle ready, but then he saw her. Maya. She was standing in the center of the cavern, her back to him. At first, John thought he was hallucinating, his mind playing tricks on him after everything that had happened. But no, it was her. Maya? His voice was tentative, almost unsure. Maya didn't move. She didn't even flinch. It was as if she hadn't heard him. "Maya!" John shouted, louder this time, his hands reaching out to her. But there was no response. He walked toward her, slower now, his pulse quickening. This wasn't right. His instincts screamed at him, warning him that something was terribly wrong. She hadn't heard him, hadn't reacted at all. As he closed the distance between them, the truth became clear. This wasn't Maya. It was a trap. The figure in front of him was a perfect replica of Maya, but her eyes were vacant, cold, empty. Before he could react, the ground beneath him suddenly rumbled, and a loud mechanical hum filled the air. The cavern was no longer just a hollow space in the earth. It was alive, and it was moving. From the shadows, figures emerged. Alien soldiers, their weapons raised, their faces obscured by the shadows. A voice echoed through the cavern, and this time, John knew it wasn't Maya's. It was Zarnok's. "You fell for it," the voice sneered. "How predictable." John's blood ran cold as the Arathian leader's form appeared on a monitor mounted on the wall. His face was cruel, his expression one of cold amusement. "You thought you could save her. You thought your little rebellion meant anything, but this is the true power of the Arathian Empire." John's chest tightened. He had walked straight into a trap. Maya wasn't here. She had been taken, maybe to lure him into this moment. His mind raced as he surveyed the soldiers surrounding him. They had him trapped. But then he remembered the detonator, the one he had kept in his pocket, a small, simple device he had stolen from the power station, the one that would disable every Arathian device within a certain radius, the one that could turn their technology against them. It wasn't a bomb. It wasn't an explosive device. It was a tool, a key to turning the tide of this war. He couldn't afford to hesitate now. John pulled the detonator from his pocket, his fingers trembling as he held it up, the dim light of the cavern flickering off its sleek surface. "You made a mistake," he said, his voice quiet but steady. Zarnok's face twisted into an expression of disbelief. "What do you think you're going to do with that?" he mocked. John's finger hovered over the button. "I think I'm going to finish what I started." With that, he pressed it. The moment John pressed the detonator, the cavern erupted in chaos. For a split second, everything seemed to freeze. Then, the harsh, electrifying hum of the Arathian machinery faltered. The soldiers around him paused, their weapons flickering, as if unsure of what had just happened. John's heart raced as he watched the flickering of the Arathian tech. It wasn't a simple EMP. It was more precise, more specific. The device he'd activated targeted only the Arathian energy systems, disabling their weapons and communication networks without causing catastrophic damage. The soldiers' plasma rifles powered down, their control panels blinking in confusion. Zarnok's expression shifted from arrogance to genuine surprise. "No!" he shouted. His voice reverberated through the cavern. "This cannot be! You dare!" But his words were cut short by the sound of Arathian soldiers muttering, realizing their systems were failing them. Their armor began to lock up, and their suits grew heavier as if they were suffocating under their own technology. John didn't waste any time. He was on the move, racing toward the nearest soldier. With a quick swipe, he disarmed the alien and took control of the soldier's blaster, aiming it at the others. The once mighty Arathians, now disoriented and vulnerable, began to panic. They couldn't adapt to this new human weapon. John didn't feel triumph. Not yet. He knew this was just the beginning, a small victory, a crack in the wall. He needed to use this moment to gather more momentum, to find Maya and finish what he had started. He sprinted deeper into the cavern, trusting the chaos he had caused to keep the soldiers off his back for a little while. The place had become a labyrinth of rock and alien technology, with strange, glowing veins running through the walls. He had no idea where he was headed, but he didn't care. The only thing that mattered was finding Maya, and getting her out of whatever trap the Arathians had set. His feet pounded against the cold stone floor, his breath sharp in the air as he ran. Then, as he turned a corner, he heard something. A voice. A faint, familiar voice. Maya's. "John," her voice echoed weakly through the hallway. Maya! His heart surged. He could barely believe it. She was alive. The voice came again, this time clearer but laced with pain. John, they're coming for you. You have to hurry. John's pulse quickened. He followed the voice, navigating the twisting path until he found a narrow passage leading to a small, dimly lit room. Inside, Maya was standing, but she was no longer the confident, battle-hardened woman he had known. She was shackled to a wall, her eyes closed, her body slumped. John, she whispered again as he rushed in, her voice hoarse. Maya, what happened? John's voice trembled as he knelt beside her, touching her face gently. Her skin was pale, and her body was bruised. It was clear she had been tortured. His stomach twisted with anger. The Arathians had tried to break her, to extract information, to get her to give up. But they had underestimated her, too. I thought I was going to die here, she said weakly, lifting her head to meet his eyes. I didn't think you'd come for me. Of course, I came for you, John replied, his voice thick with emotion. He reached for the shackles holding her arms, working quickly to release her. You're not alone. We're getting out of here, together. But even as he spoke, he could hear the footsteps of Arathian soldiers approaching. The blast from the detonator had bought them time, but not much. They couldn't stay here long. I'm not sure I can walk, Maya said, her voice strained. I'm not sure I have the strength to run again. John's heart broke at the sight of her pain, but he couldn't stop now. He had made a promise, and he wasn't going to break it. I won't leave you, he said, his voice fierce. Lean on me. With great care, he helped Maya to her feet, supporting her weight as best he could. Her body trembled under the strain, but she nodded, her eyes glinting with a spark of determination. She had always been a fighter, and now she was leaning on him. Together they were stronger. But the sound of the approaching soldiers grew louder, and John knew they didn't have much time. He turned and saw a narrow passage leading to what looked like an old ventilation shaft. It was their only chance. Stay close to me, John said, his voice low but commanding. He lifted his rifle, scanning the shadows for any movement. He could hear the soldiers, their footsteps growing closer, their chatter in a language John didn't understand. But it didn't matter. They would have to fight through them. As they moved quickly down the hallway toward the ventilation shaft, the first of the Arathian soldiers appeared, rounding the corner. John raised his rifle, his fingers steady despite the chaos in his chest. With a single shot, he took down the first soldier, then turned and pulled Maya into the ventilation shaft just as more aliens arrived. The shaft was tight, and they had to move quickly, their bodies scraping against the cold metal walls as they crawled. Maya's breathing was shallow, but she didn't complain. She stayed close to him, relying on him to lead the way. Don't stop, John urged, his own voice strained. The air inside the shaft was stale, and it felt like every breath he took was heavier than the last. But they kept moving, their progress slow but steady. He knew they had to make it to the surface before the Arathians realized they had escaped. Minutes passed, and John's mind raced with calculations. They were almost out, just a little further. And then, the shaft opened up into the light. The moment the ventilation shaft opened up into the light, John felt a surge of relief. Just a brief moment, like a flicker of hope before the storm. The sun was still setting, casting a faint orange glow over the alien landscape that stretched out before them. They had made it out of the underground labyrinth, but the real fight was far from over. The surface was a different kind of war zone. The air was thick with the smell of burning wreckage, the sounds of distant explosions and sporadic gunfire echoing through the ruined cityscape. The Arathian ships were still patrolling, their ominous silhouettes hanging low in the sky, a constant reminder that the invaders had the upper hand. John helped Maya to her feet, both of them stumbling slightly as they emerged from the shaft. She was weak, but her resolve was as strong as ever. She glanced up at him, her face pale but determined. "We need to move," Maya whispered, her voice still hoarse but with a flicker of the strength John had always admired in her. "They'll be looking for us." John nodded, his jaw clenched. His mind was still racing, calculating, planning their next steps. They couldn't stay here. They couldn't just run into the streets and hope for the best. But they couldn't afford to stay hidden for long, either. They had to find their people, organize the survivors. This wasn't just about escaping. It was about striking back. "Follow me," he said, leading her toward a nearby alleyway that had been shielded by the remnants of a fallen building. It was a small, temporary shelter, nothing more than a broken, half-destroyed structure that had once been a store. But for now, it would have to do. They crouched down behind a pile of debris, breathing heavily, listening for any signs of movement. John's eyes darted over the wreckage, keeping watch. He had no illusions. This wasn't a victory, not yet. They were still behind enemy lines. The Arathians had their city under lock and key, and John was just one man, one human, against an empire. "I don't know how much longer I can keep this up," Maya said, her voice barely audible. She was leaning against the cold metal of a collapsed car, her face pale from exhaustion. "We're running on fumes. We've got nothing left." John clenched his fists. He knew she was right. They were running out of time, and they had no resources, no allies left in the immediate area. But there was still something in his gut that told him they could win this. He'd seen it in the faces of the humans who had joined his fight. Their eyes weren't filled with fear anymore. They were filled with hope, the kind that only a spark of defiance could create. "We don't need much," John said, looking at her with a renewed fire in his eyes. "We need one good plan, one good strike, and we need to make it count." Maya gave him a tired smile, her eyes still holding that stubborn, fiery resolve. "And where do you think we're going to find a good plan?" John's mind spun through options. He'd learned enough about the Arathians' technology to know that their weaknesses were like open doors, waiting to be exploited. The power cores, the communication lines, their arrogance. They had underestimated humanity's ability to adapt, and that was going to be their downfall. "There's a communications relay station just a few miles north of here," John said. "If we can disable their comms, cut them off from the rest of their fleet, we can cripple their command. Make it so they can't coordinate with their reinforcements." Maya's eyes narrowed as she considered it. "That's a long shot, John. The station's heavily guarded. They've probably doubled the security since the sabotage of the power core. And if we fail—" "If we fail," John interrupted, his voice hardening, "it won't be because we didn't try. We're not going to let them take this world." Maya gave him a long, searching look, as if weighing his words carefully. Then she nodded, her expression steely. "All right. But we're going to need a hell of a distraction." "I know just the thing," John replied with a grin, his fingers brushing against the alien weapon still strapped to his back. It wasn't much, but it was enough. They had to make the Arathians believe they were a much larger force than they really were. The element of surprise would be their best weapon. They spent the next few hours in silence, preparing. John worked on the alien rifle, tweaking its settings to make it even more powerful. Maya gathered what little they had. A few supplies from nearby ruins, a couple of grenades she'd managed to salvage from a fallen soldier. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make an impact. By the time night had fallen, the two of them were ready. The dark sky was the perfect cover for their operation. The Arathians were used to having the upper hand in the daylight, but they weren't prepared for human ingenuity in the shadows. "Let's do this," John said, glancing over at Maya, who nodded in return. They slipped out of their temporary shelter and into the night, moving cautiously through the ruined streets. The communication relay station was still a few miles away, and they had to stay out of sight. Every movement had to be precise, every decision calculated. One wrong step, and the Arathians would find them. But John felt a sense of clarity now. They could do this. As they approached the relay station's perimeter, John's grip on his weapon tightened. He could see the outlines of Arathian sentries posted along the walls, their attention fixed elsewhere. Maya turned to him, her face barely visible in the darkness. "This is it. Once we're in, there's no turning back." "I know," John said, a quiet fire burning in his chest. "But if we succeed, we'll change everything. We'll show them that Earth isn't their playground, that humanity is something they can't just crush." He moved first, darting from shadow to shadow, staying low while Maya followed. They were close now, closer than ever. The fate of Earth depended on this mission. It wasn't just about fighting for survival anymore. It was about taking back what was theirs. John and Maya crept closer to the communication relay station, their every step calculated, every sound amplified in the tense silence. The Arathian sentries were still unaware of their presence, but time was running out. They had no way of knowing how long they had before the enemy realized something was amiss, before reinforcements arrived to squash whatever hope they had left. The relay station loomed ahead, a massive structure of metal and energy pulsating with alien technology. The walls were thick, but the access point they'd been aiming for, a small maintenance hatch, was hidden in the shadow of the building, almost camouflaged. John had seen it on an old map of the city. It was the only way in. Maya took position on one side, while John crouched by the hatch, his hands working quickly to disable the security system. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut through, and every second felt like an eternity. They didn't have the luxury of hesitation. The lock clicked open with a quiet hiss. John exchanged a brief look with Maya, both of them knowing this was the moment that would decide their fate. They had one shot at this, and if they failed, there would be no second chance. Inside, the station was a maze of dark corridors and flashing lights. The constant hum of Arathian machinery filled the air, but in this moment, it sounded like a countdown. They moved swiftly, using their knowledge of the station's layout to avoid detection. Every corner was a potential threat, but they moved like shadows, avoiding the patrolling guards, slipping through hidden doors. John's eyes darted over the control panels they passed, studying the Arathian tech. He had always been good at fixing things, understanding how machines worked. It was how he had taken down their power core in the first place. Now, he had to apply that same ingenuity to disrupt their communications, to sever their connection to the rest of their empire. They reached the heart of the station, where the main communication relay was housed. An enormous, alien device that was both impressive and terrifying in its complexity. John didn't waste time admiring it. He set to work immediately, pulling apart wires, tapping into power sources, rerouting circuits, and overriding the system. "This is it," John muttered, his hands moving faster than they ever had before. "Once I cut this, they won't be able to call for reinforcements. We'll have the upper hand." Maya was keeping watch, her weapon ready in case of trouble, her sharp eyes scanning the room for any sign of movement. The minutes ticked by, and John felt the weight of every passing second. This had to work. And then, finally, he heard the familiar click of a circuit shorting out. The Arathian system began to whine, its once steady hum faltering, then stopping altogether. "I did it," John said, a grim smile tugging at his lips. Maya's voice was quiet, but filled with relief. "Good. Now let's get out of here before they figure it out. But before they could make their escape, the door to the control room slammed open. John's heart skipped a beat. The sentries had found them. Zarnok's cruel, cold voice echoed through the speakers. You think this will change anything, human? You've won a small battle, but the war is far from over. You cannot stop the Arathian Empire. John's grip tightened on his weapon. We'll stop it, he said, his voice hard, defiant. You've underestimated us, Zarnok. We won't let you destroy everything we've fought for. The Arathian soldiers stormed in, but John and Maya were ready. John fired first, his shot taking down the lead soldier before he could react. Maya followed suit, dropping another guard in a single, clean shot. The remaining soldiers hesitated, unsure of how to react to the unexpected resistance. John moved quickly, his rifle aimed and steady, firing with precision, taking down the aliens one by one. The room filled with the deafening noise of gunfire. But in the chaos, John remained focused, his thoughts centered on one thing: getting out alive and ensuring that this victory wasn't just a fleeting moment. The Arathians were reeling, unable to comprehend what had just happened. They hadn't expected a lone human to disrupt their entire operation, to rally the survivors, to fight back with such determination. But John Kane wasn't just anyone. He was the human who had changed everything. The last Arathian soldier fell with a thud, and the room went silent except for the harsh breathing of John and Maya. It's over, Maya said, her voice thick with exhaustion. She had seen too much in too little time, but now there was a sense of finality in the air. They had won, at least for now. John looked at the communication relay, still offline, still useless. No, he said, shaking his head. It's not over yet. But this is the start. We've sent a message. We've shown them that Earth isn't soft, that humanity isn't something they can just trample on. Maya nodded, her lips curling into a smile. We've only just begun. John turned to face her, his eyes filled with a fire he hadn't felt before. The Arathians had come to Earth expecting an easy victory, but what they had found was something far more dangerous: humanity, with its strength, its will to survive, and its capacity to rise up against impossible odds. And in that moment, John knew one thing for certain: the fight was far from over. But humanity had already proven that it could stand against the might of an empire. The Arathians had made a fatal mistake. They had underestimated the one thing that would always be their downfall: humanity.